we help. This neutrality and focus on compassionate actions deeply resonate with Tzu Chi's core values. In today's lecture, Professor Laliberté will explore the crucial principle of separation of religions and politics, essential for thriving democracies. He will delve into Tzu Chi's navigation of this landscape, maintaining an apolitical stance while delivering extensive humanitarian aid and fostering social welfare. His analysis promises a broader understanding of the impact of religious organization on public good and the lessons we can learn across cultures and religions. Before we begin, I would like to express our deepest gratitude to Professor Laliberté for his dedication on studying and understanding Tzu Chi's work. His contribution helped us refine our practices and expand our humanitarian reach. So thank you all for joining us today. We all eager to learn from Professor Laliberté's vast research and insights. Thank you again. Thanks.
感恩执行长。那接下来我们来欢迎今天我们的主角，我们的安德瑞老师，大家请掌声鼓励。
上人法师，温师兄，谢谢你的非常好的
Dear Masters, and thank you to CEO Yan for your introduction. Hi everyone. I'm very happy to see you all here. I feel very sorry that I can listen to Chinese, but my speaking has deteriorated quite a bit, so I'm going to be speaking in English today. But after that, I will try to answer your questions in Chinese.
First of all, thank you very much, Sharon, for this invitation. Thank you very much for the organizer of this event. Thank you very much, in particular, Rey-Sheng and Wen Ayapi, for this kind invitation and this. To study Tzu Chi, and I hold an immense debt of gratitude for helping me over all these years to understand your work, your care, and your compassion. To understand them better and to allow me to present graciously agreed to answer my questions over the years, which sometimes were not easy questions. In lieu of introduction, for those of you who don't know me, I will just say that I'm a professor of political studies, interested in comparing countries for the sake of knowing what are the policies that work better to improve the lives of peoples, and which ones we should avoid. I have been interested from the beginning in the very important question that all our society faces. This is the question of the proper relationship between religion and politics. In my talk to you today, I will offer you my reflections on why religion matters for politics in our democracies. I will start first by outlining the broad principles of separation between religion and politics. And then I will move to the core issue of religions and the welfare state. I will illustrate this by highlighting the achievements of the Catholic Church in Canada and of course, extraordinary work in Taiwan. And I will conclude with some reflections about the differences between them and what we can learn from that comparison. And still learning. So let me start first with the observation that religions and politics should not be mixed. There are two ways to organize the world with very different starting points. They both aim to achieve the betterment of the world. But they each use a different approach. The separation of the two, best achieved in what we call a secular state, is a core principle of democratic societies like Canada and Taiwan. It's ensuring freedom of conscience and neutrality for people with different religious convictions or non-religious convictions. When religions and politics are mixed, we can face trouble. It is to the credit of Dharma Master Cheng that she has managed to keep Tzu Chi away from the politics of Taiwan. In doing so, she has protected the reputation of all its members, and its position of neutrality had made it possible for Tzu Chi to talk with any government in Taiwan. So when I started to do political studies 30 years ago, when we failed to ensure this separation between religions and politics, there are two contrasted and opposing situations in which this absence of separation is a big problem. The first one is when the politics are against religion. The most obvious case in point is, of course, one you're very familiar with, the case of China, which has experienced waves of persecutions against religion. But there are many variants of this case of persecution of religions, some milder than others. Most Western societies have adopted constitutions that have enshrined separation between religion and politics. But in some cases, people want their government to limit the rights of minority religions because they believe they do not belong. So it's still an ongoing problem even in Canada. The second question with politics and religions, the second case, is that when they are not separated, in the reverse situation, which is when religions seeks to interfere in politics. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Afghanistan are extreme cases of this situation, when religious authorities impose their values on politics. India, the largest democracy in the world, is at risk of seeing its people losing their freedoms because of the attempt to impose the supremacy of one religion over others. The temptation to impose that approach is perhaps the most widespread of the two in the world today. It exists in many countries from Africa to Latin America, from the Middle East and Southeast Asia, but also in North America, where many people would like to see their country change its laws in accordance with their religious values. One fascinating observation I've made since the beginning of my studies in Taiwan 30 years ago is that Taiwan has avoided these two situations. The separation between religion and politics is a reality here. There are no political parties of importance and no religious association either that is contesting this situation. I have done research over the years to understand how Taiwan has managed to achieve this, and I have published many articles and books, chapters on this remarkable achievement. The world has a lot to learn from Taiwan, and you should congratulate yourself for what you have done here. However, the point I want to make now is that on some occasions, the interaction between religion and politics is inevitable and even necessary. Many religions have a view of the ideal world inspired by their concepts of love, compassion, and charity. These ideals resonate with the politics of justice, fairness, and care. When the rulers of countries fail to implement these fundamental goods, and people end up with feelings of anger, distress, and fear, the consolation of prayers is not enough. And so that is why sometimes the spiritual power of religion to inspire action can become so important in politics. Close to me, I think of the liberation theology of the Catholic Church and its preferential option for the poor. I think also about the Christian faith of Pastor Martin Luther King, who has inspired by his engagement in the civil rights movement an end to racism in the United States. I think of the inspiration of the Mahatma Gandhi, who has found in the Hindu tradition so much to inspire the people of India to achieve self-determination. And of course, closer to you, I think about the Buddhist teaching of Master Tai Hsu that have inspired the pacifist vision of Master Thich Nhat Hanh in Vietnam, and that have led to the engaged Buddhism of the Dalai Lama and many others. So the particular aspect of religious values that I want to stress here is how these views are central to the issue of welfare, the poverty alleviation, healthcare, education to all, and social assistance to the people in need. Religious teachings seldom use the term of welfare, but they refer to other concepts such as compassion, charity, and care. How much the sacred scriptures that people read will inspire them to help others? How much is the preaching and predication of religious leaders and joining their followers to provide succor to the poor? In that sense, most world religions, such as Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism, have developed a social doctrine that include a religious duty to give alms to the poor and assist people in difficulty. Let me pause a moment. As someone born in the Catholic tradition, I have always found that to be a very difficult subject to discuss. The missionaries that left Europe centuries ago and arrived in the Americas were the early provider of healthcare and education for the people that went along with them in what they saw as the New World. However, those missionaries were also inspired by a zeal to convert the people that they met in this new world to their faith, ignoring the values of the early inhabitants of that part of the world. This encounter had many consequences. a majority of which was catastrophic for indigenous people. Many have perished, many have seen their cultures vanish or became marginalized. Over time, thankfully, some missionaries regretted this and tried to provide shelter for dispossessed people. But in the end, they could not prevail. It is only later, much later in the end of colonialism, that missionaries had learned their lessons from the past and decided to start with learning the language of the people they were trying to convert before getting a better understanding of who they are. We should also keep in mind, in an attitude of humility, that not all Christians think that their religion enjoins them to help the poor. Some Christians believe that they are people who have received the grace of God, and others that did not and left it at that, accepting this as a destiny. Others, however, believe that Jesus of Nazareth was a social reformer and that Christians should find inspiration in his action to show solidarity, not pity, with the poor. Hence, in Canada, Baptist pastor Tommy Douglas became the founder of the New Democratic Party of Canada, and thanks to his action, Canadians benefit today from universal health care. Another Canadian, Presbyterian minister, Pastor George Leslie Mackay, came to Taiwan, as you all know, in the late 19th century to serve the Taiwanese people. Now the Catholic Church, to get back to her, is perhaps unique in that it has elaborated a comprehensive social doctrine. It has 7 themes, and I'll go very briefly over them. First, it believes in an inherent human dignity, and the idea is that human life must be valued above material possession. Second, it looks at the family as the basic unit of society. Third, it asserts that social rights exist in a moral framework rooted in the framework of human dignity and social justice. Fourth, it upholds the preferential option for the poor and the vulnerable, which includes persons with disabilities, the elderly, the terminally ill, and the victims of oppression. Fifth, it values the dignity of work. Sixth, it professes a solidarity which extends to all others, regardless of origins. And finally, it cares for the environment. All of the themes enunciated so far have inspired many Catholics' political action, and priests in their pastoral work have taught the faithful to act in accordance with these teachings. Many individuals in Latin America and Europe have established Christian democratic parties to promote these ideals. To realize the Catholic social teaching is demanding at an individual level, however, and the forces of global capitalism and state socialism have been able to attract many people by promising material prosperity that is immediate. That is the case in Canada, where the Catholic Church has failed to inspire the creation of a political party. It was left to other Christians. I mentioned Pastor Douglas, such as the Baptists and the Presbyterians, to move forward on the improvement of social welfare. Of course, Christians are not alone in this kind of actions. Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists have also blessed acts of goodness and elevate compassion and care as high values. They have acted as provider of welfare in their communities, helping the poor and providing relief in times of natural disasters. One of the 5 pillars of the faith for Muslim is the zakat, the charity to the poor. This is an obligation to every Muslim who can do so to give, and for the people who cannot, well, it's possible to perform the zakat by making good deeds or having good behavior towards others. The ancient texts of the Hindu tradition discuss the nature of dana, the donation or charity that is offered without expecting nothing in return. And of course, in societies where Buddhist monasteries have developed in Southeast Asia, but also in China and its neighbors to the east, monastic and lay people have cultivated the fields of blessings and provided a number of social services to assist the vulnerable over centuries. Monasteries have provided shelter to vagrants, elderly people, or orphans. During the Republican period, lay Buddhists created societies such as the Red Swastika to help the poor and provide relief to the communities affected by warfare. And of course, it is remarkable that in its work, Tzu Chi has developed in a very short period of time 8 paths that are inspired by the teachings of Buddhism and derived from its actions. They are original responses to the new problems faced by modern societies around the world. The principles that inspire them resonate with the teachings of the Catholic social teachings that are presented above. But they are different, and I believe Catholics can learn a lot from them. These paths are practical matters, not abstract principles. They are animated by a vision that parallels many of the teachings of the Church, not competing with them, but complementing them. They represent religious principles turned into action. In all these examples, the religious notion that one has a duty to help others and provide relief preceded the modern notion of social solidarity embodied in the welfare state. However, all too often, people have failed to live up to their ideals because of the abject poverty that they were born into, or the trauma of warfare or social upheaval they went through. Moreover, the growing appeal of individualism and the decline of religious belief in modern societies have made the reliance on religion to provide relief and promote social solidarity impractical. It is in this context that the idea of the welfare state has emerged between the 2 world wars to ensure that social justice would be the responsibility of everyone, not only religious believers. So let me say a few words about the welfare state, which is a condition that we experience in both Canada and Taiwan, and that has replaced religions as the paramount provider of education, health, and relief to everyone. For most of our contemporaries in Western societies and East Asia, the provision of social welfare and relief by religious institutions is now considered as something that is behind us. I know it feels strange to say this here because that's not related to your reality, but I'm thinking about the reality that people experience outside of this wonderful and inspiring site. So, the modern state has emerged as the provider of welfare, public health, education, poverty alleviation, and care for people with a wide range of conditions, such as old age, disability, etc. One of the greatest achievements of industrialized societies after World War II in Western Europe has been this formidable expansion of the welfare state, which serve more people than what religions could do. East Asian societies have experienced a similar fortune 1 or 2 decades later as part of their economic miracles. This achievement in historical times is very recent. And my point is, it's already challenged. In the context of population aging, the cost of delivering services has increased dramatically. Elderly people need more care because of diminished mobility and declining cognitive capacity. This is a problem that most families in our wealthy countries experience because we live longer. Caring for a rapidly growing cohort of elderly people represents a fiscal burden for younger generations. Two ways out of this predicament are the rise in retirement age and the rise of taxation rate to finance the expansion of expenditures. In Western countries, as here in East Asia, these are some of the most unpopular policies that we can think of. For the most alarmist of economists, governments that cannot or do not want to address these issues are therefore facing the prospect of bankruptcy. This situation is exposing the limitations of the welfare state in social assistance and social welfare. So many experts whose job is to advise governments have discussed in that context the need for alternatives to the state to provide social services. The approach of caring home is favored by many of them because it releases the pressure on hospitals and prevents to a point the spread of communicable diseases. Such solution, however, comes with a problem of its own. To succeed, it requires a mobile labor force of caregivers who can perform a work that is often perceived as demeaning, dirty, and dangerous. Few people in our societies are willing to make a career in that kind of labor. When care workers are expected by the employer to live within the home of the people they look after, as is the case here, as you know all very well, and in other countries in this part of the world, the situation can be even more challenging. It is even less likely to be a job that local people will be willing to take, and for that reason, as you know, since 1992, the Taiwanese government has authorized the temporary residency of migrant workers in the sector of live-in care. But do you know that in the same year, 1992, Canada has also adopted a live-in care program to admit migrant workers in the sector of care. In the beginning, in both countries, that program has appealed primarily to migrant caregivers from the Philippines. Over the years, migrant workers have come from many countries as well, many other countries. In Canada, between 1993 and 2009, 90% of migrant caregivers came from the Philippines. The proportion was somewhat lower in Taiwan, and for the last decade, the largest proportion of migrant caregivers came from Indonesia, which now present over 60% of migrant caregivers in Taiwan. In the case of Canada, the presence of Catholic Filipina, who often are educated in English, never represented a huge cultural gap from the host population in terms of religious practice and language spoken. This is quite different here, because very few people practice Catholicism or Islam, and very few Indonesians speak Mandarin or English as Filipina did. I'm doing research on this trend in Taiwan, and my research question is how much that policy is sustainable. Canada and Taiwan share a tradition of multiculturalism with an important indigenous population in both countries. Canada's identity is also defined by the importance of immigration for the last 4 centuries, a process that has accelerated since the end of the war. Well, people in Canada are not aware of your situation here. They are not aware of this other characteristic of your country that you share with Canada. The first of a majority of your ancestors arrived in this island at the same time as the first European settlers in North America. We have also experienced a sudden influx of migration over 60 years ago, but from one country, of course, China. Now, migration has changed dramatically in both of our countries as well since the last 30 years. The new migrants are coming from places where people's languages are very different from those of our host societies, and where the religion practiced by the population in the sending country is quite different from that of the country of arrival. It is important for both Canada and Taiwan to learn from each other about the best way to adjust to these new realities. Although our countries share a tradition of freedom of religion and respect for diversity, the laws and the practices of governments have differed. Okay, so this is a new context for the Catholic Church in Canada, but before I say a few things about it, I think it is important to underline a few points about the diversity of the Catholic Church in Canada. So my talk being about a comparison between the Catholic Church in Canada and Tzu Chi in Taiwan, let me just for a few minutes give you some clarifications about Catholicism in Canada to help you see the similarities with the importance of Buddhism in Taiwan and Tzu Chi in particular. So, first of all, the Canadian government does not promote a state religion, and the only affirmation relevant to religion in Canada is its Charter of Rights and its constitution that says that it protects religious freedom. So in many ways, very similar to the situation of Taiwan, even if the history is quite different. Although Catholicism is the largest religion in the country in terms of numbers, Canada is not known as a Catholic country. In part, this is because of its history as a former British colony, and the United Kingdom's official religion, Anglicanism, is widespread among Canadians. Moreover, like its neighbors in the United States, many of the earlier immigrants who moved to Canada escaped religious persecution in Great Britain in past centuries and brought with them their own church denominations, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, etc. And finally, because of Canada's more recent history of immigration, the religious diversity of Canada has accelerated since the end of World War II. So there are 4 groups of Catholics in Canada. The first 2 ones are the descendants of French and Irish settlers who came to that part of the world known by indigenous people as Turtle Island in the 16th century. The descendants of the French are concentrated in the province of Quebec, where I'm from, and smaller communities are dispersed throughout the country. The descendants of the Irish are concentrated in the province of Ontario and moved elsewhere in the country. These groups are declining because the descendants of these communities are seeing their population diminish, but also because many of them have left their religion. They do not go to Mass, they do not marry at the church, and many of them prefer to say that they have no religious belief. And to understand this, you have to understand who is the third group of Catholics in Canada. It's the smallest one, but its history is important because it influences disproportionately that of the whole Catholic community. It's mostly the indigenous population of Canada converted by early European settlers. The early conversions resulted from the work of those missionaries I mentioned before, in the first centuries of the colonial period. Since the last century, however, conversion has resulted in many cases from the forcible relocation of children to a system of residential schools funded by the government, where pupils lost their languages, culture, and suffered from abuses. The indigenous communities in Canada face a legacy of trauma and marginalization, and the Catholic Church role explains in part why many indigenous and non-indigenous Catholics have decided to leave their church. And what I just told you is also true for the other Christian churches. And the fourth group of Catholic is more disparate. It is more from recent waves of immigration, people who came first from Italy, Poland, and Portugal, who have assimilated into the rest of the population. A more recent wave came from the Philippines. This group represents now the third largest community from Asia and Canada, after Chinese and Indians, and may soon become the largest. Filipinos, and I'm tempted to say Filipinas, because mostly they are Filipina, are distributed in mostly 3 provinces. In contrast to the other groups and the first wave of migrants from Europe, they keep the church alive. For many Filipina, the arrival in Canada mirrored the experience in Taiwan as live-in caregivers looking after elderly people who choose to stay at home. So the first 2 groups of Catholics have played a very important role in Canadian society before the welfare state as we know it. One of the first hospitals in Canada, when it was known as New France, was run by Catholic nurses. As the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops wrote, for generations, Catholic dioceses and religious orders in Canada have been major contributors to the development and delivery of healthcare services across the country. The first hospital, known as Hôtel Dieu, God Hostel, in Canada was established in 1639 by 3 religious sisters of the Augustine de la Miséricorde de Jésus, Jesus' Mercy, to care for indigenous populations living near the French colony in present-day Quebec City. This hospital happens to be the first hospital in North America, and it's still operating. I'm still learning these kind of things. The Catholic Church also operated the first schools in Canada when the country was known as New France. After the British took over, Catholic and Protestant school systems coexisted in each of the provinces of Lower Canada, which would become Quebec, and Upper Canada, which became Ontario. Even when school was publicly funded, school boards for each religion continue to exist. The Constitution that established the Canadian Confederation in 1867 required from the government of both provinces that they safeguard the rights and the privileges of the minorities, of the religious minorities in both provinces, with the creation of religious school boards. The Catholic Church did not have a school board in the other provinces except for Newfoundland, which also had many school boards for the other denomination. So before the state established universal and mandatory instruction to all with the Ministry of Education, the Church was responsible for educations at all levels. So the basic education was often an intrinsic part of the mission. Again, for indigenous people, this was also the instrument through which the Canadian state sought to assimilate them. So the involvement of the Church has left a legacy in different provinces of school boards that are governed by the Church. But the investment of the Church in higher education is also considerable. Many of the best-known universities in Eastern Canada have been established by the Catholic Church, and today, however, this legacy is often just a name, as many institutions, like the one I work for, the University of Ottawa, has been secularized. So the Catholic Church has also been involved in the recent past in a wide variety of other social services. It has often acted as a complement of the Canadian foreign policy, with its affiliated NGOs, CARE and Caritas, doing fundraising to provide support to impoverished populations in many countries. Because of its international reach and its presence in many countries, it can count on an experienced and dedicated network of persons that can work abroad but also welcome immigrants and refugees to adapt to Canadian society by providing counseling, psychological support, and help to find work. It also provides support to people who have been incarcerated and need rehabilitation. The Church can count on many non-profit societies organized to put into action the social doctrine of the Church. The Society Saint Vincent de Paul, for example, serves over 350,000 people a year in Canada, delivering clothes, food, household items, furniture, and shelter to people in need. All these missions provide the opportunity for devoted Catholics to express their faith in a concrete manner. The goal of conversion in the past was often associated with such activity. In recent decades, however, the Church has realized that such approach is unsustainable and has adopted an attitude of humility and respect for the difference of faith among the people it helps. This is inevitable in the context of a society where a larger proportion of people than before have no religion or different religion, and in which the state has grown as the main provider of social services of all kinds. So what I have described so far is the provision of social services by Catholics in Canada. It is important, but it needs to be situated in the context of an ever-expanding welfare state that is also a secular state. This expansion has coincided with an erosion of the Church's influence in Canadian society. After the war, the central government set up standards for the universal access to healthcare and expanded networks of hospitals significantly. As the population expanded rapidly, the Church could not keep up with all these changes. In 1942, during the war, 1/3 of Canadian hospitals were Catholics. The Church maintained that involvement for another 2 decades, but it has declined since. In 1968, the hospitals operated by the Catholic Church represented 35% of all healthcare institutions in Canada. That proportion has diminished to just 5% in 2022. There are many reasons for that dramatic decline. First, the number of hospitals built by provincial governments has grown to meet the rapidly increasing demand. As the population is growing old, the number of people that need long-term care has grown as well. Second, the Catholic Church itself is not spared the evolution of the broader society. Its clerics, its nuns, and lay people are getting older, and as there are too few novices interested by priesthood, the number of people able to run healthcare institutions that are Catholic is bound to decline. The point is that the government has taken charge of healthcare to the point of totally replacing the church as a main provider. Likewise, in matters of education, the religious school boards that I had mentioned before had become secularized over the years as a majority of Canadians came to believe in the merit of separation between religion and state. The Protestant School Board in Ontario became known as the Public School Board and removed all overt religiosity in 1990. In Quebec, the religious division between the two school boards was replaced by linguistic division between French and English school boards. These changes were reflecting two important religious realities in Canada: the decline of people who identify as religious, and among those who still identify as religious, a slowly increasing number of people who identify as Muslims and Buddhists. These are all processes of change that have taken a long time and that were resisted for decades. But once they were completed, they have become irreversible. It took time for the Catholic Church to accept the principle of public education administered by the government and class taught by secular teachers. In newspapers, influential people in the Catholic Church wrote editorials that complain about this change. I'm old enough to remember that time. They argued then that society will lose its culture. In fact, the Catholic hierarchy resisted the change because it realized that it would lose influence over society. This resistance, however, was not only futile, but it also alienated many people who decided to leave the church. So finally, church leaders have made up their mind and adapted to the new situation faced by their religion in Western societies in a variety of ways. Some have turned to the issue of development, which has always been an important avenue for missionaries in the past. That is the inspiration between the creation of NGOs like CARE and Caritas, which I had mentioned above. The already established connection of the church worldwide have no doubt facilitated this endeavor. Many countries in Latin America or Africa, where live many Catholics, and with which Canada wants to cultivate good relations, have presented avenue for many to do good work. Although the influence of the church has declined, it remains involved in many important public debates, such as assisted dying and reproductive rights. Some of the positions it has adopted are controversial, but they are all based on the same fundamental principles. The church has spoken up against the death penalty in favor of the human rights of exploited workers. It has also espoused the cause of pacifism and development. On the other hand, it has been too slow in recognizing the abuses committed by some of its clerics in residential schools. Now, the welfare state, as I had mentioned before, is facing increasing pressures. As the multicultural fabric of the Canadian society and its welfare state enters the 21st century, Canadians face many difficult choices. The aging of its population, because of smaller families, exposed the country to a rise in the cost of public health. The enormous financial burden of addressing a dramatic rise in cases of dementia and many mental illness related to old age, the increasing isolation experienced by the elderly in large cities, and the poverty experienced by elderly widowed women are stretching the limits of the welfare state. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the difficult working conditions experienced by nurses and medical assistants in the work of acute care and long-term care. The anticipation of labor shortage in a sector of work that most Canadians do not want has brought to light at least two realities. The selflessness of the volunteers who were part of religious orders is really missed. But the decline of churches had made that solution unrealistic from now on. Governments in Canada's provinces had no choice but open the door to migrants, some of whom temporary, to fill up vacant positions in clinics and hospitals. Only after years of struggle did new laws have started to allow these workers to become citizens. The resistance that came from some sectors of society, from people who never were willing to welcome immigrants, has been overcome. In the end, the immensity of the need has left authorities with little choice but to open the door to larger immigration. As I had mentioned above, Canada started a program for migrant workers in 1992. It was abandoned in 2014 and replaced by a new one that made it possible for temporary workers to transition to permanent resident status. One consequence of this development is that Canadian society is seeing a larger proportion of its population that belong to the Filipino community. Another consequence of this policy is that the Catholic Church is experiencing a renewed expansion. This development does not affect fundamentally the multicultural nature of Canada, which already counted a significant proportion of Catholics, as mentioned above. Now let me turn to Taiwan, a society that has more commonalities with Canada than most people are aware of. If we look at religious diversity, Taiwan is alike Canada in many respects. In both countries, there is religious freedom, and the government does not favor one religion and does not discriminate against any. The Constitution of Taiwan protects religious freedom, which is the right to believe or not to believe and to change religion. The difference with Canada is that the government used to have a Bureau for Religious Affairs within the Ministry of Interior. Taiwan counted 28 religions that are recognized legally for tax purposes as charity organizations. Another difference with Canada is that Taiwanese worship in temples of communal or popular religions on occasion. But really, there are some important similarities between Buddhists in Taiwan and Catholics in Canada, with respect to their status with other religions. Neither religion is the official religion of the country, although government officials from all political parties pay their respects to their leaders and their followers. In both cases, the census in our countries indicates that the percentage of the population who identify as Buddhists in Taiwan is very similar to that of the number of Canadians who say they are Catholics. Between 1/4 and 1/3 of Taiwanese say they are Buddhists in Taiwan, in a proportion that is similar to that of Catholics in Canada. I use vague numbers on purpose because social scientists disagree among themselves. Happy to explain why in the Q&A. So there are a few important differences, though, between Buddhists in Taiwan and Catholics in Canada that we need to keep in mind. Buddhists in Taiwan are not concentrated in a territory. Buddhists practice their religion anywhere on the island, and in every city they can find places to worship. The religion is also practiced by people of different origins. Among the Hokkien majority, as you know all well, the Hakka and the mainlanders minorities. However, I'm not aware of people among Taiwanese indigenous people who practice Buddhism. Happy to get corrected if someone here knows about this. With the exceptions, though, of migrants from Thailand and a few from Vietnam, most foreign workers are not Buddhists. Another important difference between Buddhism and Catholicism is the absence of a supreme spiritual authority for the former. Everyone in Taiwan knows about the 4 sacred mountains of Buddhism and their master, and about the 4 lay associations that are connected with them. Although most Buddhists in Taiwan know about the teachings of Venerable Taishu, in their practice they can opt to follow the practice developed by any of the master in the 4 mountains, and others, each of whom have adopted their own approaches. Of course, nothing prevents a Buddhist devotee in Taiwan from joining more than one Buddhist lay association and study the teaching of each one of their spiritual masters. Now, another aspect of Buddhism in Taiwan that make it different from the Catholic Church, but also that make Buddhism in Taiwan different from Buddhism in other countries, is the extraordinary presence of women at all levels in their religious organizations. Everyone, especially foreigners like me, had not failed to notice the presence of many Buddhist nuns in Taiwan and Buddhist female spiritual leaders. Fewer have noted that they are also leaders and masters in their organization, in its administration and day-to-day organization. Tzu Chi, of course, being the best example. But Tzu Chi and many other large Buddhist organizations in Taiwan are also remarkable because of the participation of lay Buddhist women in the administration of their organization, in activities that range from fundraising to the delivery of service. Now, the story of Tzu Chi is becoming well known abroad, and it serves as a good example of the teaching of Buddhism for this world in Taiwan and abroad. That story recounts a very important encounter between the young Dharma master Cheng and 3 Catholic nuns. When she was asked by them why Buddhists were not doing anything to help the poor, she reflected deeply and became determined to ensure that Buddhism could do for Taiwan what Catholics have done to help the poor. Well, Tzu Chi has succeeded beyond expectations in Taiwan and in the wider world, with its network of hospitals, its provision of relief around the world, and its outer realizations that have expanded to include environmental protection and poverty alleviation. The Buddhist tradition in Taiwan connects to the Buddhist tradition established for centuries in China, which was carried by Yixun, Xingyun, and many others after 1949. In that sense, the actions of Tzu Chi and other Buddhists in Taiwan share with the Catholic Church another characteristic: a long tradition of providing social welfare to the poor. Tzu Chi is also paralleling the Catholic Church in a significant and important way. It has extended its work of relief outside Taiwan. In many countries where no Buddhist lives, Tzu Chi has also, and that's, I think, an important point to note, Tzu Chi also does not seek to convert the population it assists. It is really interesting to look at the compatibility of Tzu Chi's actions with the themes of the Catholic Church social doctrine to see the points of convergence and what the difference can tell us. Many of the actions done by Tzu Chi volunteers, as I understand them, embody those principles. Certainly, the way that volunteers give from a position of humility is a clear example of upholding human dignity. The care that Tzu Chi demonstrates for the environment is undeniably one of its most relevant and strongest points. Also, there is no need to remind you of the importance of the family in this part of the world. This is a value that both Catholics and Tzu Chi volunteers, I believe, hold dear, like people around the world with a wide variety of convictions. But there are also some very interesting differences that we can learn from. Some of these differences are a matter of degree. The motto of helping the poor and educate the rich is a very interesting example. Helping the poor certainly echoes the preferential option for the poor, but the notion of educating the rich adds an element of moral education that is very interesting. The idea of social justice and the dignity of work are not part of the ethos developed by Tzu Chi, but I don't see why it could not. Social justice is an abstract principle that calls for concrete action. Dharma Master Chang Yen is in a way is bringing this idea to fruition with her emphasis on charitable actions. Perhaps the biggest gap to bridge is the theme of the dignity of work. Although Tzu Chi rightly values voluntarism and selflessness, the idea of the dignity of work also calls for the responsibility of employers to provide fair working conditions and fair wages. This is outside Tzu Chi, of course. So the themes developed by the Catholic Church are different from the 8 charitable footprints that you promote around the world. The first 4 of them, the missions of charity, medicine, education, and humanistic culture, evoke indirectly the missions of governments. 3 of the other 4 other footprints of international disaster relief, environmental protection, and community volunteer work could also be compared to missions of government. As I attempt in my research on social welfare provided by religions and governments, Western and East Asian states like Taiwan, Korea, and Japan do devote a substantial part of their budget to healthcare education. Hopefully, they will devote more to international disaster relief and environmental protection. But the biggest difference between Tzu Chi and the work of government, seen from this angle, of course, is between the work of charity, based on human kindness and taxation, the necessary duty for citizens to contribute to the welfare of all according to their wealth. I am trying to understand in my research now how far can we attribute these differences between Tzu Chi and the Catholic Church to the specific conditions of Taiwan. The situation of Taiwan differed from that of Canada because it became a sovereign state later. To make the comparison between Canada and Taiwan valid, we have to consider at a minimum the period after World War II. Even then, this is bound to be an imperfect comparison because Taiwan experienced the consequences of civil war until the early 1950s and a period of martial law until the 1980s. The modern state in the island was not responding to pressures from the population like Canada did as a result of competitive elections. Yet, despite these differences in political system, the modern state, in both cases, had the ambition to emulate the West in achieving economic development and ensuring welfare to its populations in the domain of healthcare and education. Mandatory education for everyone was a key priority to ensure that the labor force could find employment in a rapidly industrializing economy. At a time when Taiwan was a poor country, the different departments looking after the welfare of the population ensured that they could use their limited resource to help the key sectors of society that would drive the rest of the economy. Civil servants, teachers, and the employees of state-owned enterprise gradually gained some social insurance and benefits from themselves and their dependents. However, the situation for farmers and people working in small enterprises was more difficult. Many people had suffered from the mass migration resulting from the Civil War. They needed immediate relief from the government. Among the refugees from China came expelled missionaries, Buddhist monks in particular, who were looking forward to reconstituting their institutions in Taiwan. For the government, this provided them with human resources to assist them in looking for the welfare of orphans, people with disability, lone elderly, or people too poor to go to hospitals. For many churches and other religious organizations, this was an opportunity to gain a new sense of purpose. Religious institutions in Taiwan did not feel compelled to resist the expansion of the state like churches did in Western societies, because the state invited them to fill the gap that the state could not. One of the best examples of this convergence, of course, is right here, among yourselves. When the government decided in the 1960s to ensure that the poor in Hualien should have access to healthcare, they decided to entrust upon your community the care of developing an hospital. So Buddhists in Taiwan did not have to resist the expansion of the state like the church in the West. They had no power that can compare to the Catholic Church in Canada. In Taiwan, they have been marginalized during the period of Japanese colonial rule, which has imposed on Taiwan the Shinto religion. After the defeat of the Nationalist Army in 1949, many monastics from China moved to Taiwan. They tried to rebuild their institutions, so they had too little time to engage in social welfare, like Catholics and Protestants. But far from taking away from religious associations some social responsibilities in the provision of social care, the government sought their support. Indeed, it expected temples to dedicate some parts of their revenue to do charitable work. So Buddhists in Taiwan end up in a very different place compared to Catholics in Canada. Buddhists do not have the burden of being seen as hegemonic in Taiwanese society the way that Catholics have been, especially in the province I was born in. They have been largely spared the guilt of assimilating indigenous people. So let me now conclude. Canada and Taiwan face a number of similarities in terms of where the societies are going, and they both stand to gain a lot by learning from each other. On a wide range of issues, such as public transit and universal access to healthcare, I do believe that we in Canada should learn from Taiwan. In relation to my talk today, I think that the ability of the Taiwanese government and its religious leaders to work together to achieve good care for the largest possible numbers of citizens is really important to study. The issue of long-term care, as both of our societies face an aging population, is especially important. The reliance on labor migration which is expedient in addressing the shortage of nurses and caregivers, is bound to increase in the near future. In that context, religious diversity is increasing, and it's important that our governments prepare our population to the realities that our elders will increasingly be looked after by people born in a tradition that is very different from the one in which they grew up into. In a country like Canada, where the legacy of the Catholic Church has left a burden of mistrust towards most, if not all, religions, it is difficult to see how the government can bring back more intervention from religious institutions and the provision of many services. This is bound to be even more complicated when many of the new migrants profess a religion, Islam, which many Canadians are unfamiliar with and which they unfairly stereotype as violent. Taiwan has the fortunate experience of not having to cope with such a difficult legacy. The encounter between Buddhism and Islam in the next decade is going to be decisive. Thank you very much for your attention. So I wanted to conclude in a cautionary, optimistic note. Thank you.
好，那我们非常谢谢安老师的精彩演讲，是不是我们用掌声？
兄师姐们，还有我们的线上的听众，还有我们戏称是自由老师的 Andrew， 我们认识很久了，他在帮我谢谢。我在想我20分钟能做什么？因为为什么用中文？因为我在学校里负责国际化的业务啊，我们诉求是自然的双语。意思就是说，当大家
online, I know we have English interpretation. So I like to respond to André's talk, which is very broad in scope and helps us understand Canada and also apply that model to Tzu Chi. I basically agree with Professor Laliberté's observation, and I also have the mission to connect the contents of his talk to what's happening on the ground here, so that the substance in his talk can be linked to the experience here. Next, of course, I'm a political scholar, and the value I bring is to bring an academic perspective to things. So I will make some additions that I would like to discuss with André, and perhaps we can discuss this afterwards as well. I'm also a social practitioner. This allows me to connect to different communities. There are many religious groups that in which I have had experiences. This is a photo with Dr. Rey-Sheng and our colleague Wayne. And this woman is this research on Tzu Chi in China. Right now, she's working at Tsinghua University. This photo represents also my experience in Tzu Chi. When I was much younger, when people came to rent the doorbell, I go take a look and I tell my mom, oh, sisters here, Tzu Chi sisters here, what are they here to do? They come here to collect donations. So because we donated to Tzu Chi every month. So during those days, donation was not very easy. So we would invite the Tzu Chi sister into our yard, and my mom would go look for change in our house. Now, when our family was not financially well off, it was a very nervous time for us as we scrambled to find change. And another encounter with Tzu Chi was when I was doing research in Zhongzheng University. We went to recycling stations around the university. The station collected a lot of recyclables at a higher percentage than other communities. So it was very hard for me to explain why it was doing so much better. And so that was another, my first connection with Tzu Chi in research. So I found out that Tzu Chi volunteers collected recyclables from different communities door by door. And they did this so to raise funds to build a hospital. Now, Tzu Chi is a typical non-profit in this sense. Now, there's another group of people who in Taiwan collected these recyclables for sale as a means of making a living. And the public sector also does recycling, and they use the sales from the recyclables as a bonus for the waste collector workers. So these three groups combined makes recycling in Taiwan take on a lot of to allow the recycling in Taiwan to achieve a very high percentage. Now, this was also encouraged in academia. The research was encouraged in academia in disaster relief. Now, the disaster survivors we have interviewed tell us that they received their first relief goods from Tzu Chi, then they are very grateful. But if they receive their first batch of supplies, say from the military, then they feel that this is something the military is supposed to do, and in fact they arrive late. So when the recipients receive their goods from a nonprofit, then they feel that this is something that the expectation is not there for the nonprofit to be giving this help. But if it came from the public sector, then the public would feel that this is something that the government is supposed to do. So, I remember one of the researchers I was working with who had visited Tzu Chi before, and he was really impressed by Tzu Chi's work. So he became quite a friend of Tzu Chi in his research. And I also researched Tzu Chi in China, and I saw many weird phenomena, like professors in China being suppressed by the government. But when they research Tzu Chi, then they keep getting awards. Well, this is my observation of Tzu Chi, that Tzu Chi has been spreading into the rest of society. So how can religious organization play such an important role in society? I went to Indonesia, I went to Jakarta, I went to the Chinese community there, and I saw that the Tzu Chi has had a huge effect on that community. And I saw that Tzu Chi can develop very well in a Muslim society. There was something very special to me. And this had political implications. And that's why I was fascinated by this phenomenon. Finally, there was a news that I was very moved to read. Master Cheng Yan, when she took refuge under her mentor, I when she was sued and taken to court, and that to me, that impacted me. I thought it was her decision was very amazing, that she did not pursue victory in the civil court, but she looked for a solution that would put people at peace. And nonprofits do not need, we do not need a legal justification. And I think that allows Tzu Chi to have a different way of responding to these litigations. Another case was Tzu Chi's controversy in the Neihu campus development. And so in that controversy, Tzu Chi decided not to continue with the development of that piece of land. And I see that we can very proudly say that we are a friend of Tzu Chi, even though I am not part of the organization. But as someone who's acquainted with Tzu Chi and someone who lives in Taiwan, I can respond to Andre's comments. So these are my academic responses. We mentioned the nonprofit sector. And we know that the nonprofit sector does a lot. And it does this from a different angle than the government. We have nonprofits have a different motivation. And since when I came to Tzu Chi with my wife, I have known about this. When we file income taxes every May, donations to charitable organizations are deductible, and this would lower the amount of tax that we would pay. But when we donate money, if we're doing this for charity to help people, so others may live better, then we feel good. But if we do this out of religious reasons, then we do it out of an ideal, and we would not mind so much whether we donate less or if we donate more. We do it to an amount that we feel comfortable with. So these donations will flow into the society in different ways. when we are not trying to help the country, but helping the poor people around us more directly, then the value comes from the capital needed, for example, to build a hospital, to do other social work. The capital needs to come from somewhere. And every sector has different capabilities to fundraise, including monetary and labor resources. Now, Tzu Chi collects a lot of donations, and it also has many volunteers. These volunteers provide the labor that is necessary. The country can provide funding easily, but it cannot provide labor very easily. So that also comes back to capital that's available. But if a nonprofit organization is capable of gathering labor, then just like a country raises monetary capital, then the production is increased. So with these resources in place, then we create more output. Now, there is also some conflict. The easiest one to see is if we see the country as a welfare state, then the people would think that these welfares are taken for granted. They become expected by the population, and this labor that's required would be received differently by the citizens, the beneficiaries of these services. Now, when a country has the perceived responsibility to provide welfare, then when the country tries to fundraise for these services, how would it be perceived by the citizens? When religion is a big part of society, then what meaning do these services hold for the citizens? Now, Tzu Chi has given me a lot of space for imagination on what the NGO can be in different societies. I've looked at China, Philippines, Indonesia, and Germany. I see that the relationship between politics and religion. I see that Taiwan is very special in this regard. I wonder if André also feels the same way. There a lot of relationships depend on the harmony among religions. Religions are quite harmonious in Taiwan, possibly because of the prevalence of Buddhism, which stresses the equality of all beings. And if its followers go to Christian or Catholic churches, Buddhism does not object to that. When religion came to hold more influence over society in Taiwan, and especially with the tolerance that it teaches and the altruism that it teaches. Altruism is common among many religions, and as religions spread, the core, I think, is altruism. So this altruism becomes a major force in society, and this is social capital or trust. When we want to be good to others, first we need to have trust in the others. we believe the recipient would be appreciative and they will try to repay this debt of gratitude. So this relationship of trust can be expanded, and as it is expanded, when we do public service, there is an administrative overhead. And when our level of trust is increased, then the administrative overhead is reduced. Let's give you an example. When I graduated, I went to Boston to give a report. And the audience had no interest in what I was reporting on, but they asked me a question. They asked, Taiwan has a national health insurance system. How do you make that system sustainable? Because when they look at health insurance in Canada and in US, those are money-losing endeavors. So I heard an answer that I think makes a lot of sense. If we draw a pie chart where the health insurance funding goes, one part goes to the providers, hospitals, one goes to the pharmaceutical companies for providing medicine, and one goes into to the health insurance company, and another part that is often hidden is lawyer costs, attorney costs. In the US, when you go to get medical service, sometimes that is accompanied by medical disputes, and that we would involve, attorneys would be involved. But when we look at Taiwan, there is very little medical disputes because the trust between the patient and doctor is higher. When the cost for education is reduced, then more funding is available for the other components of the pie chart. This is one of the benefits that religion brings to society, increases the trust that is available among members of society. So I'm very honored to share my thoughts here today with everyone. Professor Tang. Next is our panel discussion. I'd like to invite our host, Dr. Rey-Sheng, as well, also our deputy CEO. I'd like to invite Professor Laliberté and Professor Tang. Masters of the Abode, our CEO, everyone. We'd like to also welcome our Dean Gao and her colleagues, everyone joining us online. Today, I think the talk was very impressive. Professor Laliberté compared the Catholic Church in Taiwan and Tzu Chi's development in Taiwan. Also, Professor Laliberté mentioned many things, many problems that happen to the Catholic Church in Canada. I think Tzu Chi also needs to be mindful of these changes, like the reduction of the Catholic hospitals to 5%. I think this is definitely a crisis for a large faith-based organization. If a religious organization cannot respond to the needs of society, then the reasons for its existence are reduced. I think you mentioned very key points, key problems. I'd like to mention that Tzu Chi was founded partly because of 3 Catholic nuns who came to talk to Master. Before that, Tzu Chi, before that, Master Cheng Yan also came across a pool of blood outside of a clinic, and she found that it was because Aboriginal woman who had a miscarriage was not able to afford the deposit to be admitted to the clinic. So she saw the plight of the disadvantaged communities in society. So when the three Catholic nuns came to visit her, she then decided to found Tzu Chi and to fundraise to build the funds for charity by making more baby shoes each day and sell them for money to relieve the poor. So this is not just about relieving the poor, but increasing harmony in society. This is what Tzu Chi has been working on as well. Master has mentioned that facing questions of fundamental principle, Master Cheng Yan would go with the principle rather than go with the majority of the people. And of course, we also need to be, we need to keep the harmony of the people in mind. Professor Laliberté has given us a great talk. I'd like to open up the floor for everyone here to raise questions, and then we can have interactions this way. Would anyone like to go first? Okay, Ding Gao. This is he comes from the Department of Management and Smart Sustainability.
It was just fascinating and elating. And I only have 2 questions, and not 100. And one is theoretical and one is practical. Now, the first one is when I was young, and one of the universities I studied was a Baptist university. And I took the course, Comparative Religion. And I read something about, written by Max Weber. And in his book, Protestant Ethics and the Idea of Capitalism. Now, he seems to argue that Protestant values, which actually, well, advocates hard work and progress, and eventually led to the development of modern capitalism. On the other hand, his comments on Catholicism was not that positive. And your presentation seemed to argue the contrary, sort of. Well, so what was wrong with Max Weber's point? But that's the first question. And the second one, the practical one. Now today we see a lot of Western countries, the so-called welfare states, they are on the brink of collapse. Do you think that religion can actively play a role in supporting the welfare state? Thank you.
Love your questions. It's fantastic. Yeah.
It worked.
Yeah.
It worked.
Well, first of all, I'm a fan of Max Weber. You know, for many years, Max Weber was considered passé, and Marx was considered. I think both are great, but you see very different things. They are both important. When Max Weber wrote, again, he's a great theoretician, but he was not necessarily what we would call an anthropologist, right? So he had ideas and observation also that were mostly based on his experience of Germany. And also, of course, the trends of history has invalidated some of his theories. And again, I think that intellectually it made sense on the abstract to look at the theology of one particular Protestant church. But as you know, Protestantism is a term that I found problematic. 在中国有这个天主教、基督教，对不对？但是这个基督教有很多的教派，对不对？所以，然后那个 Calvin 教跟那个
separate Christianity into Catholicism and Protestantism. And there are many different denominations in each that all have slightly different perspectives.
And Calvinists are the most austere and most extreme version of Protestantism. And what really, in a way, kind of represent the most serious challenge to Weber's theory is not the Catholicism, it's really Confucianism. Because he looked at Confucianism as being the religion that explains why East Asia is so backward. And of course, when suddenly East Asia became leader in terms of economic development after World War II, then you have people here in this part of the world that say, yeah, well, Confucianism explains capitalism. I personally don't think so. I don't think it's religion alone that can explain why societies make the choice they have. And I will add something to the Catholic Church. As you hear, I'm so supportive of some of their vision, and some of their vision I'm so critical. And in my own country, both dimensions are there. So, well, I hope that answers your question, right? So Max Weber was having a very good abstract intuition, but I think historically it's been proven wrong. And the main flaw is that he looked at only one branch of a vast movement, which is the Protestant Church, which has different ethics and perspective. Now for your second question. Wow, that's the central question of my research. Thank you very much. And I'm struggling actually to find a good answer to your question, because if you look, for example, at many countries in the Middle East, where the government is not like here, providing for the people, and the government is poor, does not have enough resource, and unfortunately the resource, when they are wealthy, coming from oil, which is varying too much, when governments are wealthy, they use it to protect the government, not to protect the people against natural disaster, against ill health, against old age, no, to protect against the people. So this is to say that in many countries where the government does not protect the people, religious organizations, of course, are appearing to the population as their savior. And what is really striking in many Islamic countries, and I have colleagues who have done work on this, they are helping the local population. But of course, when you say that religion can help people meet their needs, you know, for everything from education to, again, poverty alleviation, old age, etc., and healthcare, particularly, let's not forget, that can turn into a problem when the society is divided along the lines of religions. Which brings me to what you were talking about. I was in Jakarta 2 days ago. I was most impressed because Indonesia, to me, was so enlightening, because that's another country that I think is really can tell a lot to the world, because that's a country where religion is actually doing a lot, but not against the government. It's not the pattern that I described for the Middle East. It's an Islamic country, but Muslims in that country are really the people that I've met from the Muhammadiyah Association, which is the largest, one of the two largest charity in that country, does pretty much the same kind of work that Tzu Chi is doing here. So yes, when people have a mix of goodwill, the resource, but also the professionalism, because of course I was talking to the president, the former president of the Charity Association of the Muhammadiyah, and this man was educated, you know, in the best universities in Indonesia. He knew about economics and everything. So yes, when religion is not only a matter of the religious persons, but also working with professional lay people, that can go a long way. But then you need to ensure that governments is also supportive.
Thank you again, Professor Laliberté. And actually, my question is very friendly. It's actually not a question. Just like you to know that this morning, when I escorting Dharma Master Zhen Yan on the way to the train station for her tour for meeting her disciples and Tzu Chi volunteers in north and west part of Taiwan. And during the road, I explained to Master Zhen Yan, I can't take the same train with her because this morning we have very important lecture by Professor Laliberté. And I explained to Master Zhen Yan that your article I've read the other day, and I shared some highlights and by your lecture, and you are going to compare the Catholic Church of Canada and Taiwan, the Buddhist system, and you are humbly mentioned several times that Canada, should learn from Taiwan in healthcare and some other points. And so here comes a question. Master suddenly brought up some question for me, and she asked, "Do you have religious faith?" I mean, you. The second question is, what is your religion, if you have the? And lastly, Master Zeng mentioned, are you going to meet us in Taipei? So she concerned a lot about you. So this is the first part of question, very, very friendly.
So you have a nice engagement in Taipei with the Dharma Master. Okay, okay. Thank you, thank you.
啊，这样子，好好。对，谢谢你的问题，3个问题，所以我先要回答第2个问题，因为第一个问题是比较难回答。所以第2个问题是你听我说关于我出生天主教徒。
So the first question was about how I was born as a Catholic and my whole family was. But my family situation is what you can say is we're not very religious. My parents are different. They were very devout. So when I grew up, often my teachers were nuns or priests. So in our society, there is a very big criticism toward Catholicism in our society regarding the recent attitudes of the religion Catholicism doing not so great things to its followers. It makes me very doubtful of this religion. This is a big problem. And there's also another sociologist, not Max Weber, but another one, not Durkheim, Peter Parker. He asked why many societies are becoming secularized. Because when we are born into a Catholic family, and my neighbors are all Catholics, the whole city is Catholics, and I don't know what different religions are, because I feel like there's only one religion in the world. So Peter Berger said that in modern societies, many people have different faiths. So how do I know that my religion is right and my friend's religion is different from me? But why is his religion wrong? So this question makes it very, very hard for me to pick a religion. And there are other things about the nature. I feel that toward Buddhism is very interesting. Islam is also interesting. I'm interested in many different religions, and there are important doctrines in each. So I think this is a way to answer. I was born a Catholic, but if you ask what I believe in, I think that's difficult, very difficult for me to answer. Because I need to say that I don't know. And we can talk about the third.
Good relationship with Catholic nuns. And here comes a real question. The other question.
一个事情，对，我觉得这个是非常非常有意思。你刚刚说的，真言跟天主教的女士有关原住民，这个关系特别不一样的。这个我觉得
I think her discussion with the Catholic nuns with regarding indigenous people is very interesting.
What we means that Tzu Chi, or to greater extent, the Taiwanese people or government officials can learn from the experience of Catholic, transformation in Canada. Or what do you think about that? What we can learn from you?
所以你的问题是继续在台湾，或是去外国？
Not in other countries.
Canada can learn from Taiwan. 对。My question is the opposite.
OK. 我想对一方面就是天主教徒要了解
Catholics need to look at what Tzu Chi is doing. I think that indigenous people's attitudes in Canada, that is a big problem. This is something we are still working on, and there are problems that remain unsolved. I think you mentioned a question yesterday regarding children. Yes, that is a big problem. I don't know how to solve that problem. I think we need to learn from Tzu Chi. I don't know how to solve the child abuse problem in the Catholic Church.
对，要学怎么解决这个问题。
Right, we need to learn how to solve this problem.
So, any question? 还有 the Professor Divido.
谢谢 André. Thank you. I was waiting from political scientists to hear the word neoliberalism. I didn't hear that word today. Because with I don't think Taiwan, and certainly not America, they're not welfare states. Taiwan is not. Taiwan is very neoliberal. That's, that means the government hopes that the private sector is doing all the work that the government, we hope, should be doing. The government should be helping people, but I'm speaking for America, but they hope, ever since the 90s, ever since the Bush administration, the 1,000 points of light, faith-based initiatives, they don't want to spend money on welfare. They hope the private sector takes it over. That's neoliberalism. So keep capitalism alive, because you let the private sector take the cost, and the consumer gets the costs, and you get free labor from all the volunteers. Voila. So that's the flip side of it, right? Abode.
请最有注意的。然后美国的福利国家，我跟你同意没有了。
Oh, there's no.
没有
There's no.
加拿大这个国家有一点儿有社会福利，我觉得受了美国的影响是对的。因为我们有一个保守党，他们希望加拿大会变这样子，但是我们还有其他的政党，他们希望加拿大的社会福利越来越一点儿
parties that hope
跟欧洲
that the welfare can be further strengthened in the country, just like in Europe. But so regarding neoliberalism, about Taiwan, I often say that the national health insurance system is very good. It's better than the healthcare system in Canada. And I feel that there are many dimensions to social welfare. There is hygiene, health, education. I think in these two areas, Taiwan is frankly one of the best in the world. Better than the US, like you said. And I think in this process of comparison, I think Taiwan and Canada share the same ideals, same perspectives.
严执行长
I think neoliberalism, basically, especially American, is a disaster. Yeah, I mean, it's just, well, everything you see is capitalism in its worst form. Yeah. Yeah, and one of the, a very famous economist, Milton Friedman, now his words probably represent something. He says that what we mean by corporate social responsibility is for a company to earn as much money as possible so that shareholders benefits, and then the company will get bigger and bigger and more people will benefit. So that's the idea, and that is totally wrong. Well, personally,
So in 2019, the 100 entrepreneurs that pronounced that they are not seeking for the shareholder interest as a priority. They're seeking for the social interest as their priority. So I think it changed. So now we come with the economy of goodness. I'm sorry to propagandize myself ideal. Yeah. So.
The question is for Professor Tang. Yeah, in your second slide, you mentioned that two choices. One is synergy, and the other or competition. Can we have the third choice? No. I would say it's kind of the healthy competition. No, like a synergistic competition or competition, cooperation and competition combined. So we Tzu Chi are always seeking, kind of healthy competition, instead of synergy or competition. What is your comment on that?
So who is the one we want to have synergy or competition? Is the state or is other religion?
No, try to not to have less choice. No, two choice is not probably not the best choice. And we can have more choice, more choices. Let's try to seek in the optimum to the best interest of all society or all the countries and parties in the world. That's my point.
Yeah, the synergy and competition can be between state and religion. So that's the concept. State can do something or do nothing, like the neoliberalism, or state can do something limited. For example, in Taiwan, I pay the tax about 20%. So that's really nice, right? In the beginning, I only pay 11 in the beginning of my career. Now I can pay more, close to 30. 不错哈, yeah, so you tax so low, but you provide so many. That's the best thing. And something you don't provide, people don't expect. For example, we don't expect to have a pension fund luxury. So when you get trouble, you get all kind of safety nets from nonprofit. That's best. That's best combination. So in this situation, state is not in a competition with the nonprofit. They are cooperative, or they will produce a result we call synergy. But if we mention Tzu Chi and the Catholic, they can be competitive because my donation will go to Tzu Chi, then won't go to Catholic Church. But they have synergy too. When good stories, I heard a lot of stories from father, like Hua Guang in Hsinchu, the whole life in Taiwan dedicated to the needy people, and return to the church in Switzerland, I guess. Then this kind of stories encourage people to pay more good intention to the strangers. So that will be altruism promoted in this society. That would be nice. That's called synergy. So there are two kinds of relationship, but they will exist all together. Yeah.
Well, it's important to cherish each other's belief instead of against each other. That's for sure. And the question that raised from myself is that your final statement is that when Buddhism encounter Muslim will be very decisive. And Tzu Chi has experiences in Indonesia and in Turkey and in Jordan. We are, millions of members, donors in Indonesia, as well as millions in Malaysia. But now my question is, these all activities that collaborate with the Muslim or harmonize the Muslim, actually there are crucial leaders. Like in Turkey, we have a Muslim member, Mr. Hu Guangzhong. And in Indonesia, we do have Frankie Huang, entrepreneur. His employee and employee family all become Tzu Chi donor. They are Muslim. But my question is that Tzu Chi now sort of heavily relied on those individuals, talented individual or charismatic leader. But how can we or should we systematically establish the protocol or the model that can really sustain longer? Or, once those leader has gone and the successor can really carry on this philosophy and this harmonious relationship with the Muslim and as well as Catholic. So what do you say?
I think you make the case for the importance of having a government in Tzu Chi. You know what I mean? Structure of governance. So that when you have a change in the leadership, actually that you have assembly of the volunteers, and then they decide who they want to see to run the organization, and the different people who have been associated with the association would choose. So you have to find a way to ensure that there's a governance. And of course, the question then becomes, it's all people who are sacrificing for the organization. So it's not people who are looking for power. It's people who want to continue doing good. And people have to decide who is going to be able to do good. So 谁会做好事，所以你们要选。我的意思，为什么我说要做一个选举？因为你们不要有一个怎么说？有一个人知道自己做什么，在医院在这个医院的领导突然的他退休他不可以继续做，所以你们要这个医院的医生都一起选谁是领导。
The governance is crucial. Okay, how we structuring the governance? That's we also looking for. Yeah, and yeah, 蔡副院长，嘿。
谢谢哈，安德瑞教授、汤教授，还有我们何副执行长。
Laliberté and Professor Tang, Deputy CEO. So today's talk was very inspiring. I need to depart with Dean Gao in just a bit, but today I heard our two scholars and the comment from our CEO. I really want to raise questions from the field of management, and I hope that Tzu Chi forums can be done better in the future. So from the perspective of management science, today's topics are very interesting and very critical.
Very important because I hear Professor Tang talk about trust and social capital. This is a very good issue, and this issue can connect to Professor André. It's illustration. I think it's very good, and I think Tzu Chi he give Taiwanese people social trust and institutional trust, and we management scholar we will to divide trust into two dimensions. One is institutional trust. The other one is social trust. And the volunteer we to help these poor men. We give them social trust. So many Taiwanese people, they will trust Tzu Chi, and also Tzu Chi's management is very that many people trust. We will see this is institutional trust. So we can also to use this perspective to see church. So I hope in the future we will see this different perspective to see Tzu Chi or the other religion. Okay, and I think this will broaden our view and to help our development. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comment, because that I was listening to you and you made me thinking about something very important, and that's going to answer your question actually, one of your questions about what we can learn from Tzu Chi and vice versa. I think that one thing that first of all, the fact that I'm here and colleagues like Stefania and others came here to give their ideas about what Tzu Chi is doing is really, really an extraordinary step, I think, in the right direction. And I would urge you to continue this and to have even maybe a center for discussing public policy. I know it sounds strange, but for example, and again, I go back to Tzu Chi in Indonesia. To me, that was such an eye-opener because this is such a big organization there. There's so much goodwill in that country, but you also have so many people coming from that country here. You all know, in very difficult working conditions, etc. Tzu Chi is located to be really at the core of the public debate in this country to address the issue of women from Indonesia coming to work as caregivers and eventually become Taiwanese citizens. We've been there in Canada. We're going through that. You know, it's a complicated situation to solve. And I think that for Taiwanese, that would be something really, really new. That would be for you of a historical proportion if you make that move to accept Indonesian becoming eventually Taiwanese citizen. But Tzu Chi is the place where that could happen, actually.
Yes, thank you, Andrea, for this all suggestion and compliment. I feel that Tzu Chi have a strong relationship with the government and with the different religion, which is a very good spirit that should be maintained, you know, for the longer period of time. And I share a case with my student last week about the one enterprise called Monk Dragon, actually founded by Catholic priest back to 1950. His name is Jose Maria Arizmendi, and he founded this Monk Dragon. It's a top 10 enterprise in Spain, and assets about 30 billion euro. Now still maintain the top 10, and all employees on the company, and the CEO elected by all employees. They got the very good structures of governance, as you're saying. So that I'm amazed about the Monk Dragon. How can they maintain the spirit after the founder passed away in 1972? The father, Jose Maria Arizmendi. So they still carry on this spirit and carry on these structures. So that's I reflect to the Tzu Chi Foundation. We have such goodness and spirit and also relationship with the government, with the religion that could be a good model and paradigm to many countries and many organizations. But how can we maintain this legacy? Could be a crucial mission for all of us right here. Thank you again. Thank you for your sharing the lecture. Thank you, Professor Tang, and thank you all the participants. Thank you all.
我们来个大合照，那个请老师回做一下。
Let's take a photo together.
大合照。好，那我们看往前看那个好，那个照。
Please look forward.
好，好，慈济，再一张，1、2、3，慈济。好，也非常感谢线上有100多位在中文频道跟英文频道的伙伴们。
Thank you for everyone joining us online as well. This concludes today's lecture. Thank you for participating. Goodbye.